Hello, and welcome to my novel. My name is Neil Nevitt, and I am going to read for you my first completed novel. It's called Faith of Our Fathers, and I describe it as a novel retrospective in love. It starts with a preamble of the old hymn from 1849 written by Frederick William Faber, Faith of Our Fathers. And the old hymn, as I remember singing it in Atlanta at Second Ponce de Leon Baptist Church when I was just a kid and my mama was trying to get me baptized to save my soul from the effects of eternal hell. I remember singing this. Faith of our fathers, living still, in spite of dungeon, fire, and sword. Oh, how our hearts beat high with joy whene'er we hear that glorious word. Faith of our fathers, holy faith, we will be true to thee till death. And the dedication of my book is to Zan Mallory Ernest, my real-life Kit Holloway, most enduring and dearest friend, through thick and through thin, from cradle to tomb until the very end. I love you, and I do. Chapter 1, Jake. My unabridged American Heritage Dictionary defines the word Jake as follows. Adjective, informal, North American slang, especially during the 1940s and 1950s. All right, satisfactory, copacetic. Everything was Jake again. Just fine, great, right in order, balanced, on point. Jake Soder used the heel of his foot to shove open the glass shower door from the inside at its base. The waterproof rubber insulation surrounding the shower door in his bathroom always stuck at first, then made a loud slurping sound as it ultimately gave way and released from the interdependent waterproofing attached to the avocado green tile, securing it in place. Ever since he'd purchased his little red brick bungalow on Laurel Court in Atlanta, Georgia 6 years prior, soon after his father had died, the sticking shower door, along with the resulting sound of releasing pressure, always irritated Jake. But neither the sticking nor the unpleasant sound ever irritated him quite enough to bother with fixing it once he'd toweled dry and was off on his way somewhere more important, the shower door quickly forgotten in his wake. It was Saturday evening, just after 6 p.m., October 8th, 1988, and Jake definitely had somewhere to be that night. His recalcitrant, noisy shower door would again have to wait until another day for repairs. Jake reached over to the towel rack beside the etched glass enclosed portion of his shower stall and grabbed a battleship gray bath towel, which was still slightly damp from that morning. He held the terry cloth up to his nose and inhaled deeply. It didn't stink, so he began drying himself off with it, starting with his head full of deeply rich dark brown hair and quickly proceeding downward through his entire body, front and back, until he at last reached his feet. Once dry enough to step out from the water-drenched, slow-draining shower basin onto the warmth of the dry bath mat awaiting him, Jake used his now very wet towel to wipe clear the heavy condensation away from a mid-portion of the mirror above his sink. He stepped back to look at his reflection, evaluating, assessing, never quite admiring. He was not all that egotistical, though by many's admiring observers, he well could afford to become exceptionally egotistical. Jake assessed his new haircut favorably enough, turning his head from side to side for inspection. He liked the length his barber had left it. Neat and close cropped on the sides, slightly longer in back, still with enough mantle of hair on top and over his forehead so he could comb it back for a fuller, more satisfactory look. But were his sideburns cut evenly? Close enough, he surmised. With nearly an hour before he was due at his destination that night, he decided to give his hair the chance to dry naturally in the early autumn Atlanta evening air. His hair-dried hair always took on a bit of a wave, as was his preferred look for himself. He leaned in closer to the mirror, running his right thumb and fingers on his cheeks and chin across the dark stubble of his 5 o'clock shadow, still left over from yesterday morning. Should he shave, he wondered? Nah, He considered the question with a scowl, settling on his rough and rugged look, especially for tonight. Definitely for tonight, because there was someone else he expected to see that night who he hoped also would notice and approve of his manly, outdoorsy demeanor, not to mention his fresh, shorter haircut. Jake very much hoped to present a more enticingly attractive demeanor than he had managed the last time they had met, if their long absence from each other's lives were any true indication. Brushing his teeth and gargling with Listerine, sometimes optional for him before going out on the town because of the strange way oral hygiene seemed to make his first shot of whiskey taste, they were both mandatory given his plans for this particular Saturday night. Reaching for his toothbrush and toothpaste in the yellow plastic cup he kept beside his sink, Jake once again caught a glimpse of his reflection in the mirror. Again, he began assessing and evaluating himself. Abandoning his towel on the edge of the sink while still holding on to the toothbrush and toothpaste tube in his right hand, he took 2 short steps backwards. From this perspective, he had a fuller view of mostly his entire torso reflected back to him from the mirror. His younger sister, Bridget, once had told him he was handsome. Actually, he recalled she'd said to him, "Surely you're not so stupid that you don't realize how goddamn handsome you are." At the time, Bridget's backhanded compliment had embarrassed Jake far more than flattered him. Even now, he blushed at the memory of her words. Still, what she'd said to him always stuck in his head, echoing his constant struggle between humility and narcissism, always pushing for his humility to win out. Especially at times like this, when he's subjected himself to such intense scrutiny, he always wondered to himself, was she right? Not the part about Bridget telling him he was stupid. He knew better than that. If anything, Jake felt quite secure with his intellect. But about the handsome part, was he really as handsome as his sister and other people made him out to be? He genuinely was unsure on that point, and it was this precise uncertainty that made him even more goddamn handsome, if that was even possible. To be sure, Jake took really good care of himself. That much he readily acknowledged. He worked out regularly at the gym, a necessity for his work, and also because he enjoyed the productivity he felt from his good, long, sweaty workouts. He always felt accomplished when he finished. His upper body musculature boasted of this hard work and demonstrated his results. His trim waistline seemed to counter all the starchy carbohydrates he regularly consumed in his diet, while also standing as testament to the hours of cardio he performed each week, whether on the treadmill at the gym or on one of his daily solitary runs, miles upon miles through Ansley Park and the accompanying neighborhoods of Morningside and Virginia Highlands surrounding his house. His hairy chest, just as dark as the hair on his head, accentuated his pectoral muscles nicely. He picked his towel back up and wiped away the remaining condensation from the bottom of the mirror. Then he stood back again, evaluating his lower body as well. His most immediate assessment was that he could use more leg work during his upcoming workouts, perhaps go further distances on his jogs. Next, he followed the reflection of the heavy path of hair which ran rather tauntingly from his pectoral muscles down below his chest, encircling his belly button and proceeding further down to his groin area in a classic, increasingly slender male V formation. Jake believed his so-called treasure trail made his stomach appear flatter, and for that he appreciated his hairiness. The treasure between his legs, so to speak, to which he understood the term treasure trail referred, was satisfactory enough for him. At least it had always served its designated purpose well enough. Guess that was one aspect of his existence he could actually thank his dear old dad for. His father had always boasted to Jake that he'd given all his best parts of himself to his son. Well, that and his dark, thick hair, at least. True enough, Jake's lean, fit, muscular physique, along with his classically good-looking face, made him distinctly one to turn heads in public. Had he continued his close inspection of his body, and he'd been forced to admit it, he would have to concede that the image he was looking at in the mirror might well be that of Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, also called the Canon of Proportions. Perfect in their respective symmetry, balance, and beauty, both Jake and Leonardo's model shared the semblance of the universally designed connection between physicality of form and substance of the divine. His teeth thoroughly brushed, mouth washed, Jake decided against cologne for that evening. He possessed only one bottle of men's fragrance in his medicine cabinet, a bottle of Giacomo di Giacomo, which Bridget had given him 3 Christmases ago because some perfume purveyor at Rich's department store had given her a whiff and she simply could not resist buying it for her older brother. Jake mainly wore the stuff when he was invited over to Bridget's house with her husband Brent, so Jake still had the majority of the bottle left unused. Deciding against the cologne, Jake strode from the bath into his bedroom where his television was tuned to the post-show for the National League Baseball Championship Series Game number 3, which he'd watched earlier that afternoon. After their victory, the New York Mets now led the Los Angeles Dodgers in the league championship by 2-1. So Jake figured, albeit incorrectly, that the Mets likely would advance on to the World Series. If the Atlanta Braves weren't playing, Jake really didn't have much vested interest in whatever team prevailed, either for the league pennant or for the World Series. He simply liked baseball for the sake of the game. Watching the Mets beat the Dodgers 8-4 earlier that afternoon from Shea Stadium up in Queens, Jake had busied himself laying out his outfit for the evening neatly across the foot of his king-size bed. Underpants, undershirt, socks, belt, and all. He wanted to leave nothing to chance of his own last-minute second-guessing or indecision that evening. Carefully reassessing his clothes selection once more, he despaired momentarily over his uniquely uninspired choices. Still, he didn't have time to switch things up at that point, at least not again. He'd been mulling over what he should wear that night for over a week now, all of which had irritated him immensely because something so superficially banal as clothing would never preoccupy so much of his time under ordinary circumstances. But tonight, for Jake, was no ordinary circumstance, and he did not regard his choice of outfits either as superficial or as any sort of a waste. Once committed, he dressed himself quickly, rather routinely, then closed his bedroom door halfway so that he could examine himself in the full-length mirror hanging on the back of the door. He adjusted his belt buckle with his shirt buttons in fly so that they all aligned perfectly with each other. He tucked in the back of his shirt more firmly into his pants, and then he was set to go. But it was only 6:20 p.m. He really did have time to pick out a different outfit if he wanted to. He lived less than 5 minutes from the location of the party he was attending that evening. He hadn't planned to leave his house until 6:45 at the earliest. Bored with the repetitive commentary and conjecture from sportscasters on TV, Jake pressed the first of only 2 buttons on the remote control, turning off the set, and he walked briskly down the short hall from his bedroom, through his dining room at the rear of his house. In the kitchen, a short expanse of cabinets, previously serving as some sort of makeshift butler's pantry, he supposed, now had become his bar and liquor cabinet. From the nearest overhead cabinet, Jake retrieved his accustomed large crystal tumbler and the half-full bottle of Maker's Mark bourbon. He generously free-poured himself a stiff, neat one and took his drink into the living room to enjoy while staring out the front bay window from his easy chair until it was time for him to leave. By 6:40, Jake had drained his glass of its whiskey and felt himself becoming anxious, projecting countless different imagined scenarios in his head as to how the night might unfold. He returned to the kitchen, placing his tumbler in the sink to wash later. He probably wouldn't get around to washing his whiskey glass until tomorrow morning, he presumed. This time correctly. Either that, or he'd be home washing the glass by 8:30 if the evening turned out to be a bust. Strolling through his living room once more, this time over to the front hall closet, acting as casual as humanly possible, given his increasing state of underlying nervousness, he retrieved his favorite leather jacket, headed directly back through the dining room and out onto his back deck through this set of French doors, locking them from the outside behind him. He walked down a long flight of wooden steps, out to the freestanding 2-car garage in his backyard, quickly jumped into his dark maroon Jeep truck waiting there for him, and drove speedily off toward the Piedmont Driving Club. By 6:44, he'd arrived, and had to wait 15 minutes in his truck before going inside, so that his entrance was perfectly timed in precisely the manner he had planned. That's the end of Chapter 1. Tune in for the next video for Chapter 2. Thanks for listening. Bye.